You think your camping trip was rough? Brother, you haven't seen anything yet. Picture this. Tens of thousands of men crammed together in muddy fields, no running water, and absolutely zero understanding of germs. Welcome to a Napoleonic war camp, where hygiene wasn't just bad, it was downright horrifying. Now, I know what you're thinking. How bad could it really be? Oh, my friend, buckle up. Because what I'm about to tell you will make you appreciate every single modern convenience you've got. We're talking about an era where taking a bath was considered dangerous. And the bathroom situation? Well, let's just say you're gonna want to hear this. When Napoleon's Grand Army marched across Europe, they weren't staying in fancy hotels. These guys were living in conditions that would make a college dorm room look like a five-star resort. We're talking about 100,000 soldiers, sometimes more, all packed into temporary camps that popped up faster than you can say, Vive l'Empereur. The average soldier carried everything he owned on his back. And I mean everything. His musket, ammunition, a blanket, maybe a spare shirt if he was lucky, and a cooking pot. That's it. No toiletries, no hygiene kit, nada. The concept of personal hygiene as we know it didn't exist. You've got to understand something here. In the early 1800s, people genuinely believed that bathing too often could kill you. I'm not making this up. Doctors actually warned against it. They thought opening your pores with warm water would let diseases into your body. Wild, right? All right, here's where things get really interesting. And by interesting, I mean absolutely disgusting. How did thousands of soldiers handle their business in the field? The official answer: latrines. Long trenches dug at the edge of camp, usually downwind if the officers remembered to think about it. But here's the kicker. These weren't the nice private porta-potties we have today. We're talking about open pits, shoulder to shoulder with your fellow soldiers. No privacy whatsoever. Just a bunch of guys squatting over a ditch, having conversations like it was the most normal thing in the world. And it gets worse. Way worse. These latrines? They were supposed to be cleaned and moved regularly. Supposed to be. In reality, during long campaigns or sieges, they just keep piling up. Can you imagine the smell? On a hot summer day? With thousands of men using the same spot for weeks? But wait, there's more. Not everyone made it to the latrine. When you're sick with dysentery, and trust me, pretty much everyone got dysentery at some point, you didn't always have time to make the walk. Soldiers would relieve themselves wherever they could, behind tents, in the woods, sometimes right in the camp streets. One French officer wrote in his diary about wading through camp and having to watch every single step to avoid, quote, the disgusting deposits left by men too ill to reach the proper facilities. That's putting it mildly, buddy. Now we get to the million-dollar question. What did they actually use to wipe? Toilet paper as we know it didn't exist. The first commercial toilet paper wasn't invented until 1857. And even then, it didn't catch on right away. So what did Napoleonic soldiers use? The most common answer? Whatever they could find. And I mean, whatever. Leaves were popular when available. Grass, too. But here's the thing. When you've got 50,000 soldiers camped in one spot, the nearby vegetation disappeared pretty quick. Stripped clean like locusts had come through. Moss was considered a luxury item. Soft, relatively absorbent. If you found a good patch of moss, you were living large. Some soldiers would actually collect it and keep it in their packs. Can you believe that? Hoarding moss like it was gold. Straw and hay from animal bedding? Fair game. Corn cobs in areas where corn was available? Absolutely. Old rags torn from worn-out clothing? You bet. One account mentioned soldiers using smooth stones near rivers. Stones? Let that sink in for a minute. The really desperate guys? They'd use their hands and then wipe them on the grass or rinse them in the nearest stream. The same stream, by the way, that other soldiers were drinking from downstream. Makes you queasy, doesn't it? Here's a fun fact that'll really blow your mind. Wealthy officers sometimes had access to pieces of old newspaper or discarded letters. This was considered incredibly fancy. Having paper to wipe with meant you were practically royalty in the military hierarchy. Let's talk about water for a second, because this ties into everything else. Clean drinking water was almost impossible to find in these camps. Think about it. You've got tens of thousands of men, plus horses, all concentrated in one area. Where do you think all that waste went? Straight into the local water supply, that's where. Rivers and streams near military camps became cesspools within days. Soldiers would be washing their clothes upstream. Horses would be drinking and doing their business midstream and downstream. That's where some poor guys were filling their canteens. The smart soldiers, and there weren't many of them, knew to boil their water. But here's the problem. Boiling water requires fuel, firewood, and in areas where armies had been camping or marching through, all the trees were already gone, used for cooking and keeping warm. So most guys just drank whatever water they could find, straight from the source. Brown, cloudy, probably with things floating in it. What could go wrong, right? Everything. Everything could go wrong. Dysentery, typhoid, cholera, these diseases ripped through military camps like wildfire. In some campaigns, Napoleon lost more men to disease than to enemy action. The Battle of Austerlitz? Brilliant victory. The hospitals afterward? Absolute nightmare. You want to know how often the average Napoleonic soldier bathed? Try never. Okay, that's a slight exaggeration. Some guys would rinse off in a river or stream if they had the opportunity. But a proper bath with soap? Maybe once a month if they were lucky. More likely once every few months. And soap was expensive. Real soap? The kind that actually cleaned you? That was for officers and the wealthy. Regular soldiers made do with whatever they could scrounge up. Sometimes just sand or ashes to scrub with. Clothing rarely got washed either. A soldier might have one spare shirt. Maybe. That shirt would be worn until it literally fell apart. We're talking weeks, sometimes months without washing. The smell must have been absolutely unbelievable. One British officer who encountered French prisoners of war described the odor as something that could knock a man down at 20 paces. He wasn't exaggerating. Body odor, unwashed clothes, rotting teeth, infected wounds, all mixed together in a lovely bouquet of eau de battlefield. Speaking of teeth, dental hygiene was virtually non-existent. Soldiers might chew on sticks to clean their teeth if they thought about it at all. But most didn't bother. Tooth decay was rampant. Bad breath was universal. And if you got a really bad toothache, your buddy would just yank it out with pliers. No anesthetic. Just bite down on a leather strap and pray. Here's something you probably never thought about. How did these guys wash their clothes? When they actually did laundry, which was rare, they'd head to the nearest river with their spare shirt. They'd beat it against rocks, maybe use some ash or sand as a scrubbing agent, rinse it in the river, and hang it to dry. But remember what we said about those rivers? Yeah. So basically, they were cleaning their clothes in water contaminated with human waste, animal waste, and who knows what else. Then they'd put those clothes back on their bodies. Doesn't that just warm your heart? The really fun part? Lice. Oh man, the lice situation was out of control. Every soldier had lice. Every single one. It wasn't a matter of if, it was just a matter of how many. Soldiers would spend their downtime reading their shirts, which was slang for picking lice out of the seams of their clothing and cracking them between their thumbnails. Some guys gave up entirely and just accepted their fate as walking lice colonies. Can you imagine? Just constantly itching, all day, every day, with no relief in sight? The medical situation in these camps deserves its own horror story. Army surgeons did their best, but they were working with basically zero knowledge of germ theory. They didn't understand infection. They didn't sterilize their instruments. They'd go from one patient to another, sawing off limbs with the same bloody saw, wiping it on their already filthy aprons between patients. Want to know something that'll really get you? Surgeons would sharpen their scalpels on the soles of their leather boots. The same boots they'd been walking through camp filth with all day. Field hospitals were set up in barns, churches, or just open tents. Wounded and sick soldiers were packed in tight, lying on straw that rarely got changed. The smell of gangrene, festering wounds, and human waste mixed together in these places. If you got a minor wound in battle, it would almost certainly become infected. And infection usually meant amputation. No antibiotics, no antiseptics. Just hope the surgeon was sober enough to cut straight and that you didn't bleed out or die of shock. The survival rate for amputations? About 50-50. Flip a coin. Those were your odds. Here's something most people don't know about. Camp followers. These were the women, wives, girlfriends, sometimes just entrepreneurial ladies who followed the armies. And before you get any ideas, these weren't what you might think. Many of them were legitimate washerwomen, cooks, and nurses. They were the ones who actually maintained some semblance of hygiene in the camps. They'd do laundry for soldiers who could pay. They'd cook meals that were more substantial than the usual hard bread and salt pork. They'd care for the sick and wounded when the medical corps was overwhelmed. Without these women, the hygiene situation would have been even worse. if you can imagine that. They brought a small dose of civilization to an otherwise barbaric situation, but life for them was incredibly hard. They had to keep up with the army on the march, carrying their own supplies. They faced all the same dangers as the soldiers: starvation, disease, enemy action, and they got zero official recognition or support. Let's talk about food, because this ties into the whole hygiene disaster. The standard military ration was pretty simple: hard bread called ship's biscuit or hardtack, salted pork or beef, and whatever the soldiers could forage or steal from the countryside. That hardtack? It was often infested with weevils, little bugs that would burrow into the hard bread and lay eggs. Soldiers would tap their biscuits on the table before eating to knock out the bugs. Some guys just ate them anyway. Extra protein, right? The salted meat came in barrels and could be years old. It was preserved with massive amounts of salt, which made it almost inedible without soaking it first. But soaking it required clean water, which, as we've established, was nearly impossible to find. Cooking was done in communal pots over open fires. The same pot that cooked your stew might have been used earlier to boil clothes or wash equipment. Cross-contamination? Never heard of it. And here's a detail that'll make your skin crawl. Rats were everywhere in these camps, thousands of them. They'd get into the food supplies, contaminate everything, and soldiers would just work around them. Find a rat in your flour sack? Just shake it out and keep cooking. Camp life was bad, but at least it was stationary. When the army was on the march, that's when things got truly desperate. Imagine marching 20, 30, sometimes 40 miles in a day, in wool uniforms, in the heat of summer. No deodorant, no opportunity to change clothes or wash, just sweating into the same outfit day after day. When the army stopped for the night, there was no time to set up proper latrines. Soldiers would just go into the bushes around the camp perimeter. The next morning, they'd march on, leaving behind a trail of human waste for the next army, friend or foe, to deal with. During winter campaigns like the disastrous invasion of Russia, things got even worse. Soldiers would develop frostbite, but their feet were so filthy and their socks so crusted with dirt and dried sweat that they couldn't even tell how bad the damage was until it was too late. Many men lost toes, feet, or entire legs to frostbite, made worse by the complete lack of hygiene. Their boots would freeze to their feet, literally becoming part of their rotting flesh. Here's a sobering statistic for you. In most Napoleonic campaigns, disease casualties outnumbered battle casualties by a ratio of about 3 to 1, sometimes higher. Typhus, spread by lice, was a massive killer. Dysentery, from contaminated water and food, was even worse. Cholera could wipe out entire regiments in a matter of weeks. The thing about these diseases is they didn't care about rank. A general could die from typhus just as easily as a private. Napoleon himself was reportedly sick with various ailments throughout his campaigns, probably not helped by the sanitation situation around him. During the Russian campaign of 1812, Napoleon started with over 600,000 men. Less than 100,000 made it back. And while the Russian winter and battles took their toll, disease was the biggest killer. Typhus alone probably claimed 200,000 lives. To be fair, some officers recognized that hygiene was a problem. A few enlightened commanders tried to enforce sanitation rules. Regular latrine digging, mandatory distance between latrines and water sources, orders to bury waste, inspections of camp cleanliness. But enforcement was nearly impossible. You can't watch 50,000 men every minute of the day. And when soldiers were exhausted from marching and fighting, cleaning up the camp was pretty low on their priority list. Some armies had better hygiene than others. The British Army, for example, had stricter rules and somewhat better enforcement. But even they struggled with the same basic problems. Too many men, not enough resources, and zero understanding of how disease actually spread. Here's something we don't talk about enough. What did living in these conditions do to a person's mind? You're constantly sick. Your body always hurts. You're hungry, thirsty, filthy, and infested with parasites. You can't remember the last time you felt clean or comfortable. Death surrounds you, not just from battle, but from disease, infection, and simple misery. Many soldiers became completely desensitized to the disgusting conditions. They had to, just to survive psychologically. What would horrify a normal person became routine. Eating food crawling with bugs? Sleeping next to a dying comrade? Using the latrine shoulder to shoulder with a dozen other men? Just another day in the service of the emperor. This psychological numbness was probably necessary, but imagine trying to return to civilian life after years of this. How do you readjust to normal society when you've been living like an animal for so long? You might be wondering, were Napoleon's armies uniquely filthy, or was everyone dealing with this? The answer is everyone. Every army of the period faced the same hygiene crisis. The Austrians, Prussians, Russians, British, they all had the same problems. Some were slightly better than others. The British Navy, for example, had figured out that lemon juice prevented scurvy, which gave them a leg up. Some armies had better logistics and could supply their troops more consistently. But fundamentally, nobody had cracked the hygiene code. Nobody understood germ theory. Nobody knew that dirty water could kill you just as dead as an enemy bullet. It wouldn't be until the Crimean War in the 1850s and the work of pioneers like Florence Nightingale that armies started to take hygiene seriously. And even then, progress was slow. Here's what gets me about this whole situation. These were often the same men who would charge enemy cannons without flinching. They'd face cavalry charges, stand in line while musket balls flew past their heads, march through blizzards and deserts. But a simple understanding of hygiene, something we teach kindergarteners today, could have saved more of them than any battlefield tactic. Wash your hands, boil your water, don't poop where you eat. These basic concepts would have prevented more casualties than any brilliant military strategy Napoleon ever devised. Isn't that wild? The courage to face death in battle, but not the knowledge to avoid death from dirty water. So what's the point of diving into all this disgusting detail? First off, it gives you a massive appreciation for modern medicine and public health. We take for granted that we can turn on a tap and get clean water, that we have actual toilets, that we understand germs and how to prevent disease. Our ancestors, and not even that long ago, just 200 years, didn't have any of that. They were flying blind, making their best guesses, and dying in droves because of it. Second, it shows how much human knowledge has progressed. The jump from 1810 to today, in terms of hygiene and medicine, is absolutely staggering. We went from not understanding that dirty water makes you sick to eradicating diseases like smallpox entirely. Third, it reminds us that heroism and suffering came in forms we don't usually think about. We remember Napoleon's battles, Austerlitz, Jena, Wagram, but we don't remember the thousands of soldiers who died slowly in field hospitals, or from dysentery in a muddy camp, or from infected wounds that a shot of penicillin could have cured. Life in a Napoleonic war camp was brutal in ways most of us can't even imagine. The hygiene situation wasn't just bad, it was actively deadly. Poor sanitation killed more soldiers than all the battles combined. These men lived in conditions that would be considered torture by modern standards. They wiped with leaves, grass, or whatever they could find. They drank contaminated water. They wore the same filthy clothes for months. They were infested with lice and parasites. They watched their comrades die from diseases that could be prevented with basic hygiene. And yet they marched, they fought, they endured. So next time you're complaining about your bathroom not being fancy enough, or your shower running cold, or having to use single-ply toilet paper, think about these guys. Think about what they went through with basically no toilet paper at all. Makes you grateful for modern plumbing, doesn't it? What do you think? Could you have survived even a week in a Napoleonic war camp? Would you have made it, or would the dysentery have gotten you first? One thing's for sure, we owe a huge debt to the medical pioneers who figured out that maybe, just maybe, hygiene matters. Those thousands of soldiers who suffered through these conditions weren't just fighting for their countries. They were unknowingly paving the way for the public health revolution that would save millions of lives in the future. Pretty humbling when you think about it, right?